Here comes Peter Cottontail, hopping down the bunny trail. Hippity-hoppin', Easter's on its way, bringing every girl and boy baskets full of Easter joy, things to make your Easter bright and gay. He's got jelly beans for Tommy, colored eggs for Sister Sue. There's an orchid for your mommy, and an Easter bonnet too. Oh, here comes Peter Cottontail, hopping down the bunny trail. Hippity-hoppity, happy Easter Day.
Each year, on the first Sunday after the full moon, which takes place after the equinox in the spring, over 1 billion Christians and Catholics celebrate the religious holiday known as Easter. And the secular world observes this holiday as well and embraces it because of the mystical and mysterious elements associated with it, such as egg-laying bunny rabbits. And let us not forget those ethnic foods which are attached to the holiday as well, such as Easter ham and hot cross buns, and the activities such as hunting for Easter eggs and rising up early for Sunday sunrise church services. Easter really brings people together. Easter is by far the most attended Sunday of the year for most U.S. churches. According to Lifeway Research, a study released in 2012 asked 1,000 Protestant pastors for the 3 highest attendance Sundays, and 93% responded Easter, followed by Christmas, which was followed by Mother's Day. Easter is a very important time for churches. It brings in most of their attendance in the year, and it brings in a great amount of money into their congregations. In fact, in the United States of America and other countries, giving to religious organizations is at its highest on Easter, outranking even Christmas for the amount of donations that are received. Tens of millions of individuals attend a religious service at least once a week. That number goes up by even 25% on Christmas, which goes up nearly 50% on Easter Sunday. Many churches even have to have multiple services just to accommodate the massive influx that will be visiting their congregation during that particular time of the year. And this is a major opportunity for donations. And these donations literally see the churches through the harsh summer months when donations are at its lowest, because many of their attendants may be on vacation or they may be preoccupied with other matters. And then during Thanksgiving, those donations begin to pick up again, preparing for the Christmas season, and on the cycle continues. It is very important to modern Christianity that Easter does not go away anytime in the near future. Easter is big business all over the world. However, in the United States of America, the National Retail Federation estimates that Americans will collectively spend $17.3 billion on clothing, food, decorations, and other holiday items in 2017, which is up from $16.4 billion in 2016. They will spend $2.4 billion strictly on candy for the holiday, up from an estimated $2.2 billion the previous year. This is major in a climate of recession that the United States of America has seen. Easter keeps the economy afloat along with other holidays such as Christmas and Halloween. You may be surprised to learn that the term Easter actually does not appear in any of the manuscripts of the Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek documents that constitute what people call today the Bible or the book. However, one very popular translation does contain the term Easter appearing once, the King James Version. However, this was a mistake and it was fixed in the New King James Version, and it can be easily proven. We will examine this further in Acts chapter 12, verse 4. And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. This is easily checked today. We can look at the Greek manuscripts and we see clearly that the term Easter or its equivalent does not appear, but rather what does appear is the term Pascha, which comes from the Hebrew Pesach. And Pesach refers to the Passover, the festival that is recorded within the scriptures that marks the great exodus out of Egypt, that the Israelites came out of bondage by the mighty right hand of their Elohim, Yahuwah. And this is very important to note because Passover appears throughout the scriptures, especially in the Tanakh, what is called the Old Testament by some, and then there is also references throughout the Brit Hadashah, the renewed covenant, or what people call the New Testament. Those references in the New Testament which refer to Pesach always have the Greek Pascha there. So therefore we know that this is referring to the Passover and not Easter. This can further be verified by checking the Aramaic Peshitta. And in the Aramaic Peshitta, we see the term Pisca, which is an attempt at transliterating the term Pesach. And this is further proof that the term Easter does not appear, but rather the Passover. And even if it were applying to some festival called Easter, it clearly is not a festival that any of the disciples of Yahushua, the Hebrew Messiah, observed. This can be verified in the Encyclopedia Britannica, but most importantly in the scriptures, of course. But even the Encyclopedia Britannica in the 11th edition, volume 8, on page 828 reads, "There is no indication of the observance of the Easter festival in the New Testament or in the writings of the Apostolic Fathers. The first Christians continued to observe the Jewish festivals, though in a new spirit, as commemorations of events which those festivals had foreshadowed. Thus the Passover, with a new conception added to it, of Messiah as the true Paschal Lamb. Therefore, we know that people originally understood that in the renewed covenant, in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, that the Passover was the primary observance that Yahushua, the Hebrew Messiah, kept, and his students, his disciples after him, and they taught their students after them to keep the Passover and the rest of the festivals of Yahuwah. Now we look at the New Catholic Encyclopedia and we read, since Bede the Venerable, the origin of the term for the feast of Messiah's resurrection has been popularly considered to be from the Anglo-Saxon Iestre, a goddess of spring. The old High German plural for dawn, Eosteron, whence has come the German Ostern and our English Easter. Therefore, according to the Catholics, who originated the observance of Easter and spread it throughout the earth, the origin of the name of Easter, which cannot be found termed this way in the scriptures, actually refers to Iestre and Iostre and Ostern and a goddess known as Ostara and Ishtar of Babylon even. Some Aramaic speakers could not properly pronounce the sheen in Ishtar, and they rendered it Istar and Estar. It's very important to understand this because we see that phonetically the etymology of Ishtar and Easter are from a Semitic or a Shemitic source. Though it is true that the exact term Easter never appears as a festival observed by the early believers in the scriptures, it has to be understood that the female deity who is called Easter, Iestre, and Ostara is mentioned in the scriptures by the Shemitic named Ashtaroth and Ashtoreth, also called Malka Hashemayim, or the Queen of the Heavens. This is very important to understand because the creator of the universe, Yahuwah, has warned his people not to worship Ashtaroth, who is the consort of Baal or Baal. The Hebrew scriptures and archaeology from ancient Babylon will tell us a great deal about the origins of the female deity known as Ishtar or Easter. According to Bereshith, that is the book of Genesis, Nimrod was the founder of ancient Shinar and Babel or Babylon, the region known as Mesopotamia, the cradle of human civilization. Nimrod was the all-supreme ruler of the region. The scriptures tell us that he was a mighty hunter against the face of Yahuwah, and he became a tyrant, a mighty tyrant, one who was worshipped in the earth. The scriptures will tell us that he was a mighty one. In the book of Genesis, or Bereshith, Nimrod decides to unite all of humanity under his rulership and build an immense tower which would reach the heights of the heavens. This building project displeased Yahuwah, the creator of heaven and earth, and he confounded and confused their languages, making it impossible for the project to be finished. The loyal subjects of Nimrod left the region, but took with them his religious political system and expressed it in their various languages throughout the earth. The name of Nimrod's queen was Sumar Amat, which has been Hellenized to Semiramis. They were worshipped by their subjects and revered as deities. Nimrod has been identified in the religions of the occult as the great hunter, the horned one, and identified as the chief sun deity, along with many other titles. Nimrod is known by thousands of aliases, such as Baal, Molech, Jupiter, Zeus, and on and on. Sumar Amat, his queen, was known as the Queen of the Heavens, the Virgin Mother, Ashtaroth, Astarte, Ishtar, Easter. The Chaldeans identified her with the planet and deity Venus. The Greeks and Romans identified her with Astarte, Artemis, Venus, and Diana of the Ephesians. Nearly all female deities of the ancient and modern world reflect her in some way, shape, or form. Legend has it that Sumar Amat fell from the sky in the river Euphrates in a giant egg. To signify her divinity, to the people she performed a sign of changing a hare into an egg-laying bunny rabbit. Thus, the symbols of the egg and rabbit were adorned by her priest and used in various fertility rituals. The religions of Mesopotamia and the surrounding areas have it that Nimrod, who is Baal, was slain for his rebellion against the Creator. Supposedly, according to legends, in that region he was cut into little pieces and his body parts were scattered throughout the region, similar to what we see with Osiris in Egypt. In an attempt to resurrect the fallen deity, his wife Sumar Amat, or Semiramis, found and assembled all of his parts with the exception of his reproductive organ. Sumar Amat commemorated his reproductive organ by setting up decorated trees called asherim, which the scriptures identify clearly and forbid constantly the decorating of sacred trees. And she erected obelisks to commemorate Nimrod's everlasting phallic symbol. After Nimrod's death, Sumar Amat was found pregnant. She claimed that Nimrod had ascended into the heavens and impregnated her through the rays of the sun because now he was the chief sun deity. Thus her child was born during the winter solstice, around December the 25th, or Christmas today, and she named him Tammuz, and Tammuz was the baby son of the god. And Tammuz was gorged to death by a wild boar when he was 40 years old. To honor his life, worshippers of the ancient Babylonian mystery religion would mark their foreheads with the T for Tammuz and fast for 40 days, 1 day for each year of the life of Tammuz. Their fast would conclude on the first day of the week at sunrise after procession of the vernal equinox on the holiday known as Ishtar or Easter. To remember baby Tammuz, who had grown to be 40 years old, the faithful would break their fast by feasting on swine because swine were the cause of the death of Tammuz. Therefore, eating the swine was a sacred rite to be done on Ishtar Sunday during that time. Early in the morning, on the vernal equinox, priest of Ishtar, or Easter, would impregnate virgins on Ishtar's altars. On the opposite side of the altar, priests would slay 3-month-old babies that had been born from the previous year's celebrations and offer them to the deity Ishtar, known as Ashtaroth also. The priest would then dip eggs that were sacred to Ishtar into the crimson blood of the infants as an ancient fertility rite to bring fertility and to bring rain for the coming season. And these were the abominations that Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, had warned his people to stay far away from. And he told them time after time not to worship idols and not to sacrifice their children to these idols, because they are nothing more than demons and devils. Therefore, Ishtar and Easter are to be understood as demons of ancient Babylon. 4,000 years ago, the patriarch of the Israelite nation, Abram, who was renamed Abraham, was born in Ur of the Chaldees, a province of ancient Babylon, under the supreme rulership of King Nimrod. While Abram was still young, he and his father migrated to the land of Haran, which was also under the rulership of Nimrod in the land of Babel, or Mesopotamia. At this time, Abram would have seen all types of cultic worship involving the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth, or Ishtar and Easter. He would have seen the female deities' images all over the place, because the land of Haran was steeped in the worship of Easter or Ishtar. And in the land of Haran, Yahweh, the creator of heaven and earth, the true Almighty, revealed himself to Abram and showed him that he is not a mighty one that is made with human hands. He is not an idol that should be worshipped. He is not Baal, he is not Ashtaroth, but rather he is the eternal Yahweh. Yahweh spoke to Abram and instructed him to cross the river Euphrates and to leave that Babylonian system forever. Abram crossed the river Euphrates and came into the land of Canaan, which is known as the Promised Land. Yahweh established an everlasting covenant with Abram, and he changed his name to Abraham. He showed him that all of the land that reached from the river Nile to the river Euphrates would be his descendants after him, and that he would raise up from Abraham a seed that would rule over all nations. And this is to be known as the Messiah, HaMashiach, the Anointed One, who will rule and reign. This is Yahushua. It is very important to understand the narrative of Abraham, because it tells us the heart of Yahweh, that he desires his people to come out of this pagan system of Ishtar and Easter and the worship of Baal, to cross that spiritual river Euphrates and come into the true Promised Land and to keep his commandments. Yahweh raised up from Abraham a righteous seed, a righteous lineage. He gave to him Yitzhak, which means laughter. It has been translated Isaac. And Isaac had his son Yaakov, or Jacob, that would carry on this everlasting covenant of Abraham through him. Yaakov was renamed Yisrael by the Malach Yahweh, the messenger of Yahweh. Yisrael fathered 12 sons. These 12 sons became known as the 12 tribes of Yisrael, or Israel. One of his sons, Yehuseph, or Joseph, was sold into slavery into Mitzrayim, or Egypt. And because of this and various events, all the Israelites ended up in the land of Egypt, and they became the slaves of the Mitzrayites. Yahweh heard the cries of his people, and he sent a redeemer known as Moshe, who is called Moses. And he gave him the fiery Torah, as the scriptures tell us, the instructions, the principles of Yahweh to deliver to the Israelites. Yahweh delivered his people with mighty plagues, 10 plagues that he poured out upon each of the mighty ones of Egypt, and he poured out upon the people. The final plague being the death of the firstborn. On this night, Yahweh instructed all Israelites that they were to take a lamb, a perfect one, and they were to slay this lamb. They were to mark their homes with the blood of the lamb, and that when Yahweh saw the blood, that he would pass over their homes, sparing them from death. And it was on this night, the night of the Passover, the Pesach, that Yahuwah took for himself a people, and he reinstituted the covenant made with Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. He brought them out of the land of Mitzrayim and called them out into the wilderness to deliver them and to send them to that promised land. However, while they were in the wilderness, they tried Yahuwah many times. Yahuwah spoke to them from Mount Sinai, saying, I am Yahuwah your Elohim. You shall have no other mighty ones against my face. But it was only days later that they began to worship the golden calf in the wilderness. And Yahuwah smote them throughout the years in the wilderness that they wandered throughout that desert. And we see that they struggled with their Elohim constantly. There were righteous, mighty people of Yahuwah who did the right thing throughout the wilderness, but there were also those who continued to fall by the wayside and continued to strive against Yahuwah until finally we see the introduction of the worship of Baal Peor in the wilderness because of Balaam, who is the false prophet, who put a stumbling block in front of the children of Israel and sent out prostitutes to lure male and female converts to Baal or Baal. And the Torah makes it very clear that Baal and Ashtaroth has always made prostitution a sacred and holy act in their religion. Yahuwah has despised the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth since the very beginning because it originates with the worship of Shaitan, the dragon. It is very important to understand these principles because righteous Israelites continuously spoke out against the Queen of Heaven and against Ashtaroth, but wicked Israelites continue to fall under her spell of prostitution, and they still do to this very day. Not long after the children of Israel arrived in the promised land, we see in Judges chapter 2, verse 11, Then the children of Israel did evil in the eyes of Yahuwah, and they served the Baalim, or the Baals, and forsook Yahuwah, Elohim of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Mitzrayim, or Egypt, and went after other Elohim, other mighty ones of the people, who were all around them. And they bowed down to them, and they provoked Yahuwah. So they forsook Yahuwah, and served Baal and Ashtaroth. Baal, literally in English, means Lord. It is a generic title and name. And Ashtaroth is in the plural. The singular form is Ashtar. Judges chapter 10, verse 6. And the children of Israel again did evil in the eyes of Yahuwah, and served the Baalim and the Ashtaroth, and the mighty ones of Aram, and the mighty ones of Sidon, and the mighty ones of Moab, and the mighty ones of the children of Ammon, and the mighty ones of the Philistine, or the Philistines, and forsook Yahuwah, and did not serve him. Therefore, the displeasure of Yahuwah burned against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines, and into the hands of the children of Ammon. It is very important to understand that Yahuwah told the children of Israel that they should love him and serve him with all of their heart and all of their mind and all of their being. And if they would forsake Yahuwah, that all of the curses written in the Torah would come upon them. But if they would serve him, then all of the barakot, what people call blessings, would pour down upon them. The children of Israel constantly forsook Yahuwah, and when they did, he smote them and allowed them to be conquered by their enemies. Now, let us fast forward to the time of Yirmiyahu, or Jeremiah, the prophet. Jeremiah records in chapter 7 of verse 18, the children are gathering wood, the fathers are lighting the fire, and the women are kneading their dough to make cakes for the queen of the heavens, and to pour out drink offerings to other Elohim to provoke me. Is it me they are provoking, declares Yahuwah? Is it not themselves unto the shame of their own faces? Therefore, thus said the Master Yahuwah, see my displeasure, and my wrath is poured out on this place, on man and on beast, and on the trees of the field, and on the fruit of the ground, and it shall burn and not be quenched. We see that the families that lived in Jerusalem, in the Kodesh set apart city of Yahuwah, that they were kneading dough and preparing cakes. These cakes would be decorated with the cross of Tammuz. These were the first hot cross buns, and they were doing this to provoke Yahuwah to wrath. And Yahuwah says that he will pour out his displeasure and his wrath on that place. And he did. And he poured it out on man and beast, on the trees of the field, and on the fruit of the ground. And he used Nebuchadnezzar, the sovereign of Babylon. You see, Babylon revived yet again during this time, and its sovereign, its king, was Nebuchadnezzar, who went against and pillaged the children of Yehudah, who are called the Jews or Judah. And when he brought them as slaves into his city, they would pass through the Ishtar gates, the gates of Easter. These were the gates of oppression for the children of Yahuwah and for his people. We know during this time that Yirmiyahu escaped and he never went into Babylon. However, Daniel, who is called Daniel, and Ezekiel, Yehezekiel, also did go into Babylon, and they flourished there as prophets of the Most High, guarded by Yahuwah Elohim of Yisrael. Ezekiel was given a vision of the wickedness that was still taking place in Jerusalem. In Yehezekiel, Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 14, we read, "And he brought me to the door of the north gate of the house of Yahuwah while it was still standing. It was destroyed not too long after this event. And I saw women sitting there, weeping for Tammuz," Tammuz being the immaculate conceived child that came forth from the mother goddess Ashtaroth or Ishtar or Easter. Then he said to me, "Have you seen this, O son of man? You are to see still greater abominations than these." And he brought me into the inner court of the house of Yahuwah, and there at the door of the Hekal of the palace, the temple of Yahuwah, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs toward the Hekal of Yahuwah and their faces toward the east, and they were bowing themselves eastward to the sun. The sun is only in the east when it is rising. The prophet Yehezekiel or Ezekiel has witnessed that the elders of the house of Yehudah are involved in a satanic Ishtar Sunday sunrise service, an abomination to Yahuwah Elohim of Yisrael, and they are doing these abominations complete with the 40 days of weeping and fasting for Tammuz, the counterfeit Messiah of the Babylonians. This time of weeping and fasting for Tammuz lasted 40 days and was ended with the finale of Ishtar Sunday, the equivalent of today's Lent celebration, which is done by Protestant and Catholics today. To make matters worse, Yahuwah says that they had set up an image of jealousy in the house of Yahuwah. Now this was either an Asherah, which is a decorated sacred tree, which is symbolic of the Babylonian tree of life, and we see this in the Christmas tree of today, or this was an obelisk, both of which are phallic symbols. It could have even been a combination of the two, referred to today as a maypole, which is a pole that is used from a sacred tree and decorated with tapestries. This is very important to understand. The scriptures also tell us that the elders of the house of Yehudah had brought in idols of the Babylonians. These idols, they are described as being unclean creatures, unclean beasts, unclean according to the book of Leviticus that tells us what the difference between a clean animal and an unclean animal is. An unclean animal is an abomination, not to be eaten, and it is not set apart or sacred in any kind of way. However, in Babylon, they worshiped these unclean beasts and deified them, especially the rabbit. The celestial rabbit, known by the Greeks and Romans as Lepus, was worshipped by the Babylonians. It was the consort of Ashtaroth, one of her many familiar spirits. Since ancient times, pagan civilizations have viewed the rabbit as a symbol of fertility, along with the sacred egg of Ishtar. The rabbit is still a symbol of fertility used today and a symbol of prostitution. The unclean animal is sacred to the worship of Tammuz, namely the worship of the pig that conquered Tammuz. This is important to comprehend because Yahuwah says that the swine is abomination. You do not touch its dead carcass, you do not eat it. It does not split the hoof, it does not chew the cud, therefore even its dead body is abomination unto you. But the Babylonians worship these things. Yahuwah Elohim was enraged that the elders of the house of Yehudah would worship these abominations and do these practices in his house. Therefore, the decree was that Yahuwah said that all of them should be slain, and indeed they were. Yahuwah will begin judgment in his own house, amongst his own people, before he judges the rest of the world. All of this information is easily accessible. All one has to do is use a dictionary, encyclopedia, or the internet today to discover that Easter has pagan roots. Even on the surface, one can see that something is not quite right about the Easter holiday and its affiliation with the Hebrew Messiah, Yahushua. And the really sad part is that when Christian pastors and teachers are presented with this information, they will acknowledge that they already knew that Easter had pagan origins, or that the various celebrations were obviously pagan, but they will say that it does not matter because they are not bound to the law and commandments of the Most High Yahuwah.
Sun God is for Sunday. Moon God is for Monday. That's a sermon for another time. Believe me, much of what Christianity salutes is pagan to its roots.
All this business about mistletoe, pagan. Christmas trees, pagan. Giving out gifts, pagan. Every bit of it is pagan. Every single bit of it is pagan. We've Christianized it all. And so that's good.
Satanists, witches, and warlocks, and all types of idol worshippers all over the world still celebrate Ostara, Ishtar, and Easter to worship the female deity of ancient Babylon. This is very important because the witches understand that the Christians have essentially hijacked parts of their religion and used them as their own.
We're ready for our ritual segment, and as I said before, we're going to be celebrating Ostara. As I told Becca and Emily, Ostara means bunnies and candy, and what else? And eggs. Oh my, right? It's a fun holiday, and we all enjoy it. We all know what a lot of the other world celebrates, which is Easter. It always surprises me how similar Easter, Ostara, what do you think? Think they're related? Yeah, could be. This season, this holiday has a lot to do with fertility, with spring, new growth, rebirth, all kinds of fun stuff, and that's what bunnies and eggs are all about.
By all the old and ancient gods, you who have watched us come through the winter, as we now start to romp into spring.
Easter and Ostara are derived from the Teutonic goddess Ostra. The name is thus Germanic and not Celtic in origin, as some mistakenly believe. The Ostra is a goddess of the dawn and of springtime. The English word east is also derived from her name, again owing to her role as goddess of the dawn.
Goddess, lady of delight, maiden clear and bright, flowers bloom in the field, your powers are revealed.
That we've charged these eggs. Pass them out. On them you will find a word. The word is what you need to concentrate on, focus on until the next full moon.
Now he was a rabbit, and it was traditional that the people would take eggs at this time of the year and they throw them into the bonfire to make the crops grow, right? Well, it just so happened that Simon Willoughby used to play tricks on the people all the time. When they get their eggs ready to throw in the bonfire to work the magic. Just a minute. Simon Willoughby would take the eggs and hide them, and the people had to go find the eggs. So that's why every year, as star as bunny, Simon Willoughby, he would go hide all the eggs. So that's why we follow that same tradition. We take Simon Willoughby, which was the Astara's bunny, and we'd go hunt the eggs that he hid from everybody. Okay, now I'm going to say he was very mischievous. Okay.
Well, you find the eggs and then you throw them in the fire?
Well, we're going to do a ritual first, and then we're going to do the tradition of hunting down the eggs. Do y'all want to do the ritual with me? Okay.
Yeah.
Nearly all Christians will state that Easter does not mean this to them, and they will say that they do Easter for the Lord. However, Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 30 reads, "Guard yourself that you are not ensnared to follow them after they are destroyed from before you, and that you do not inquire about their Elohim, their mighty ones, saying, how did these nations serve their Elohim, their mighty ones, and let me do so too." Yahuwah says, do not do to him as the other nations do to their mighty ones, because their mighty ones are nothing more than demons. In the book of Devarim or Deuteronomy, further in chapter 18, verse 9, "When you come into the land which Yahuwah your Elohim is giving you, do not learn to do according to the abominations of those Gentiles, those nations. Let no one be found among you who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire," in other words, human sacrifice, "or one who practices divination, or a user of magic, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For whoever does these are an abomination to Yahuwah, and because of these abominations, Yahuwah your Elohim drives them out from before you." Yahuwah states that all the nations practice magic and witchcraft, and they bow down to idols, and Yahuwah forbids all of these. In the King James Version, the word me'onen is translated an observer of times here. This term is interchangeable with the using of magic and omens. This is important because the Hebrew term me'onen literally can mean to observe times, to practice magic, or to interpret an omen. The time, known as Ishtar, is a high Sabbath to witches and to those who practice the occult. Therefore, Yahuwah says, let none of them be found among you. Therefore, almost all of Christianity today is guilty before Yahuwah, creator of heaven and earth, for mixing pagan worship in with his set-apart truth. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 reads, these are the words of Shaul or Paul. It says, "No, but what the Gentiles, the nations offer, they offer to demons and not to Elohim. And I do not wish you to become sharers with demons. You are not able to drink the cup of the master and the cup of demons. You are not able to partake of the table of the master and of the table of demons." Further, he says to the Galatians in chapter 4, verse 8, "But then indeed, not knowing Elohim, you serve those by which by nature are not Elohim or mighty ones. But now, after you have known Elohim, or rather are known by Elohim, how do you turn again to the weak and poor elementary matters to which you wish to be enslaved again? You observe days and months and seasons and years." Remember that Hebrew term for observing days and months and seasons and years is me'onen. It is forbidden in the Torah of Yahuwah. It is forbidden to observe pagan holidays. You observe days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you, lest by any means I have labored for you in vain. Shaul, the apostle of Yahushua, states to the Galatians that he is concerned that all of his labor for them has been in vain because they have gone back to worshiping pagan deities by observing their set-apart days, months, seasons, and years. Thus, they are drinking from the cup of the master by giving him lip service, but also drinking from the cup of demons. 2,000 years ago, the creator of the universe, Yahuwah, sent his only brought forth son, Yahushua, to renew the covenant made with Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and all of the house of Yisrael, which is called Israel. Yahushua is Hamashiach, the Messiah, the sovereign, who was prophesied to come into the world by all of the prophets. He is the one who would come forth through the royal lineage of King David or David, who would rule over all nations and smite them with a rod of iron and rule in righteousness, and his reign will never end. This is important because Yahushua, his very name, means Yahuwah, the Father, saves, redeems, and delivers. The name of the Messiah of Israel gives all praise, honor, and credit to the Father, Yahuwah, for salvation. This is why when Yahushua taught us to pray, he said, Abinu Shabashamayim Yitkadesh Shemka, our Father, who is in the heavens, set apart and sanctified is your name. Yahushua said, I did not come with my own teachings, but with the teachings of him who sent me, who is Yahuwah the Father, the same one who spoke to Moshe the prophet and to all the Israelites at Mount Sinai, saying, I am Yahuwah your Elohim. You have no other mighty ones against my face. You do not make for yourself a carved image of any likeness which is in the heavens above, the earth beneath, or the waters beneath the earth. You do not bow down to them. You do not serve them. This is Yahuwah Elohim, who revealed himself to Abraham, to Yitzhak, to Yaakov, who spoke through the mouth of all the prophets. And Yahushua confirmed all of the words that Yahuwah spoke. And he taught from the Torah, and he taught from the prophets. And he did this because he, Yahushua, is the everlasting Torah, the everlasting law and instruction, the word of Yahuwah made flesh. He is the roaring lion of the tribe of Yehudah of Judah. But when he came the first time, he came as the meek, suffering servant of Yahuwah. And he laid down his life to renew the covenant through his blood and to gain back all of the house of Israel, all of those who had been lost to sin. This is important because a martyr in Hebrew is called Shem HaKodesh, one who makes the name set apart and sanctified. Yahushua set apart the name of Yahuwah through his death and became the slain lamb so that we could be grafted into the true olive tree of Israel and so that we can live forever through his blood. And this is the great promise of the good news. Yahushua came proclaiming the everlasting basar, the everlasting glad tidings of Yahuwah, that Malkut Yahuwah, the kingdom of Yahuwah, is near. And this is the good news that we believe in, that the kingdom of Yahuwah is at hand. Yahushua is the slain lamb. We read about his martyrdom. We read about his death in Yahuchanan chapter 19, verse 13. Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Yahushua out and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation day of the Passover week. Here it refers to the week of unleavened bread as the Passover week, because literally the Passover meal is eaten right at the beginning of Hagmatzot, the feast of unleavened bread. And it says, and it was about the 6th hour. So this is the day that the lambs would be slain at the temple. And it says, and he said to the Yahudim, see your sovereign, see your king. But they shouted, away, away, impale him. And Pilate said to them, shall I impale your sovereign? The chief priests answered, we have no sovereign except for Kaiser, except for Caesar. The chief priests rejected Yahushua, even though Yahushua had thousands of followers who were Jews, who were Yahudim. Thousands of them. It says in verse 16, and at that time, then he delivered him to them to be impaled, and they took Yahushua and led him away. And again, it was the preparation day of the Passover. Verse 31 says, therefore, since it was the preparation day, that the body should not remain on the stake on the Sabbath, because when the sun set in the evening, that would begin the high Sabbath of unleavened bread. The first day and the last day of Hagmatzot, the feast of unleavened bread, are Sabbaths. So it says, therefore, since it was the preparation day, that the body should not remain on the stake on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high one, the Yahudim asked Pilate to have their legs broken, that they be taken away, because when a person is hanging from a tree and you break their legs, they suffocate to death because they are no longer able to rise to collect the oxygen in their lungs. So this is really important. This was a way to quickly kill those men that had been nailed to the stake. And when they came to Yahushua, it says in verse 32, it says, therefore the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and the other who was impaled with him. But when they came to Yahushua and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and instantly blood and water came out. And he who has seen has witnessed, and his witness is true. And he knows that he is speaking the truth in order that you might believe. For this took place in order for the scripture to be filled, that not one of his bones shall be broken. This is in Psalm chapter 22. However, the scriptures tell us that the Passover lamb could not have a broken bone. Yahushua is the fulfillment. He died at the exact moment, the exact hour the scriptures record that the lambs were being slaughtered at the temple. The time that that first lamb was slaughtered, Yahushua gave up his spirit. Is very important because he is the fulfillment, the prophetic fulfillment of the feasts of Yahuwah. Not just the Passover, but all the feasts, including the Sabbath. It says they did not break his legs so that the scripture might be filled. Not one of his bones shall be broken. Verse 37, and again another scripture says, they shall look on him whom they have pierced. This is in Zechariah or Zechariah. And this is so beautiful because Yahushua, the Messiah, fulfilled the Passover that the Israelites had been rehearsing year after year after year. A picture of the Exodus from bondage and slavery. And Yahushua showed them the Exodus, the way to the Father, to leave the slavery of sin and death forever. Yahushua is the Lamb of Yahuwah, and his message is the eternal Torah of his Father. And what's really important to understand is that Yahushua's students, his disciples, were not called Christians. They were first called Christians by Greek in Antioch, according to the book of Acts. But Shaul, who was called Paul, and all the students of Yahushua were called Nazarene. Nazarene, just as Yahushua is called Yahushua HaNazari. It means the offshoots, the watchmen. They are the guardians of the Torah. And Yahushua was the guardian. He was the offshoot who came forth from the root of Yeshai, just as the prophets have spoken. Very critical. Yahushua said in Matthew chapter 12, verse 40, for as Jonah, who is called Jonah, was 3 days and 3 nights in the stomach of the great fish, so the Ben Adam, the son of Adam, shall be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So Yahushua died on the Passover. He was laying in the tomb at the beginning of unleavened bread, a picture of the purging of the leaven. Very important. He said he would be in the earth, dead in the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. It is mathematically impossible to come up with 3 days and 3 nights if you start the count from Friday and say that the Messiah rose on Ishtar Sunday. But that is what almost all of Christianity says, that the Messiah died on Good Friday and rose Easter Sunday. But even a child cannot get 3 days and 3 nights out of that time frame. It is impossible and improbable. And if a teacher cannot count to 3, he has no business teaching you the eternal covenant of Yahuwah, and he has no business teaching the reality of the Messiah of Yisrael. Yahushua was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. Then Yahuchanan, the book of John, records in chapter 20, verse 1, it says, in most translations, and on the first day of the week, Miriam from Magdala came early to the tomb while it was still dark. So the sun had not rose yet, and saw that the stone had already been removed from the tomb. So therefore Yahushua raised before Easter Sunday sunrise. The whole premise for Sunday worship from the Christians is that the Messiah of Israel rose on Sunday. But we see in the scriptures that early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, that when Miriam from Magdala went to the tomb, the stone had already been rolled away. Therefore, the Messiah of Israel, who said that he is the master of the Sabbath, rose on the Sabbath day. But further, we have to examine this term, the first day of the week. The thing that has to be understood is the word day is inserted into the text. It does not appear in the Greek. But what we actually see in the Greek is the phrase miaton sabbaton. Sabbaton is an attempt by Greeks to translate the term Sabbath, as they do not have a term Sabbaton in their language. So this is a translation from Sabbath. So what it really says is the first of the Sabbath. What does this mean, the first of the Sabbath? Because we know that the Sabbath day, the seventh day of the week, had already passed. What is this? This is an idiomatic expression which refers to the first day of the counting of Sabbaths that brings you to the finale of what people have called Pentecost, the count of 50, but the Hebrews call Shavuot, which literally means weeks, because you number for yourself 7 completed weeks. The morrow after the 50th day is Shavuot, or Pentecost. This day, the first day of the count, is the first fruits offering of barley. It is called in the scriptures Rashit Katsir, the first of the harvest, or the Bikurim, the first fruits. This is so beautiful because Yahushua the Messiah rose on the weekly Sabbath, but he presented himself to the Father in heaven at the exact moment that the high priest would lift up the grain offering in the temple as a first fruits offering. What's really beautiful is the term first fruit and firstborn are the same word in Hebrew. They are the word bikor. Therefore, the idea that Yahushua is the firstborn, the first fruit, it is interchangeable. And we see that he fulfilled all of these beautiful things. But we see clearly that Yahushua had already risen from the grave as first fruits. Then if we examine 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Shaul, who is called Paul, says in verse 20, but now Messiah has been raised from the dead and has become the first fruits of those having fallen asleep. Yahushua didn't raise on Easter Sunday. He rose from the grave on the scriptural day of first fruits. Easter is not always in line with the Passover. Sometimes Passover happens a whole month in time different from Easter. This is so important because these two holidays do not reflect the worship of the same mighty one. Easter reflects the worship of Baal and Ishtar, while the worship and observation of Passover reflects the worship of the Eternal One, who is Yahuwah, who spoke the living words through the mouths of the prophets and through his son, Yahushua. Yahushua died on the Passover. He was laid in the tomb during the time of unleavened bread, and he conquered death and the grave and rose on the day of the Sabbath and presented himself to his Father the next day during what the Greeks called Miaton Sabbaton, but what the Hebrews called Rashit Katsir, on the first day of the barley harvest. Very beautiful. So Yahushua rose on the first day of the counting of the Omer. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Shaul, who is called Paul, reiterates his stance on keeping the Passover well after Yahushua's death and resurrection. Many years after his death and resurrection, Shaul, who's called Paul, says to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, therefore cleanse out the old leaven, which is what you do during the preparation time for Hagmatzot, which is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, so that you are a new lump, that you are unleavened. So he wants you to be unleavened bread, spiritually speaking. For also Messiah, our Passover, our Pesach, was offered for us. Verse 8, so then let us observe the festival, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of evil and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread, with the matzah of sincerity and truth. Shaul, the teacher of Yahushua HaMashiach, who brought the glad tidings to the pagans throughout the Roman Empire, tells those who lived in Corinth that they should observe the Passover. He did not say that they should observe Ishtar or Easter, but we see that those who claim to be students of Yahushua have traded the Passover lamb for Ishtar ham. They have traded the way of Kodeshah, of set apartness, for abominations. They have traded the Eternal One, Yahuwah, for nothing more than demons and devils.
In the 2nd century, the Bishop of Rome attempted to persuade the assemblies of Asia and Syria to begin observing Easter Sunday. Polycrates, who was an overseer of the assembly of Ephesus, responded by letter to the Roman bishop stating, "We observe the exact day, neither adding nor taking away, for in Asia also great lights have fallen asleep, which shall rise again on the day of the Master's coming, when he shall come with the esteem from heaven, and shall seek out all the saints. Among these are Philip, one of the 12 apostles, and moreover John, who is Yahuchanan, who was both a witness and a teacher, who reclined upon the bosom of the Master, and Polycarp in Smyrna, who was a bishop and martyr, and Thrices, bishop and martyr from Eumenia, the bishop and martyr Sagris, the blessed Papirius, or Melito. All these observed the 14th day of the Passover, according to the good news, deviating in no respect, but following the rule of faith. Yahushua was clear that we are to memorialize his death during the Passover each and every year until his return. He made no mention of memorializing his resurrection or of a new holiday named Easter that should be celebrated with ham, hot cross buns, Tammuz crosses, maypoles, Sunday sunrise, bunny rabbits, and sacred Ishtar eggs. Luke chapter 22 verse 19, and taking bread, giving thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given to you. Do this in remembrance of me." 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 26, "For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the death of the Master until he comes." The great apostasy that the writers of the renewed covenant spoke of fermented for several centuries among the Gentiles. By the 4th century, the Easter observation would become a Christian and Roman law put into motion by the Roman Emperor Constantine. Constantine sought to unite his kingdom's pagan and Christian worshippers in order to promote stability and ensure that his empire would last. The easiest way for him to accomplish harmony in his reign would be to blend pagan sun worship from the Romans and that of the philosophies of Christianity. Roman Emperor Constantine was the first emperor of the Roman Empire to convert supposedly to Christianity. He did so without an immersion, without what people call a baptism, only by signing a decree. And by signing a decree, overnight, every Roman citizen supposedly became a Christian, even though pagan cults continued to flourish. The Catholic Encyclopedia says about Emperor Constantine, the emperor himself, writing to the churches after the Council of Nicaea, exhorts, "At this meeting, the question concerning the most holy day of Easter was discussed, and it was resolved by the united judgment of all present that this feast ought to be kept by all and in every place on one and the same day. And first of all, it should appear an unworthy thing that in the celebration of this most holy feast, we should follow the practice of the Jews, the Yahudim, who have impiously defiled their hand with enormous sin. For we have received from our Savior a different way." Even though Yahushua was a Yahudite, he was a Jew, and he kept the Passover. Further, he says, "And I myself have undertaken that this decision should meet with the approval of your sagacity, in the hope that your wisdoms will gladly admit that practice which is observed, which is Ishtar or Easter Sunday, at once in the city of Rome and in Africa, throughout Italy and Egypt, with entire unity of judgment." After his official conversion to Christianity in 312, Constantine built his triumphal arch in Rome. His arch was to be the backdrop of the colossal Helios statue that was standing at the time. The arch itself is dedicated to Mithra, the sun deity, and depicts him and his symbols throughout. Mithra was born on December the 25th, the Greek and Persian equivalent to Tammuz. He was known as Solus Invictus, the unconquered sun. After his supposed conversion, Constantine had coins minted that depicted him and the deity Sol or Mithra. During Constantine's reign, he legislated that the celebration of the Day of the Sun should be a holiday for all of Rome. He writes, "On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. In the country, however, persons engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits, because it often happens that another day is not so suitable for grain sowing or for vine planting, lest by neglecting the proper moment for such operations, the bounty of heaven should be lost." Roman Emperor Constantine was in fact a Mithra worshipper. When he says that the venerable day of the sun should be a day of rest, it should be noted that the term venerable day is the reference to Solus Invictus, the day of the sun deity. Catholic Church Council of Laodicea in 364 of this common era states, "Christians shall not Judaize and be idle on Saturday," which is the Sabbath, "but shall work on that day. But the Lord's day," their Lord, Baal, "they shall especially honor, and as being Christians shall if possible do no work on that day, on the day of the sun, the day of Solus Invicti, the day of Mithra. If, however, they are found Judaizing, they shall be shut out from Messiah." The Roman Catholic Church is a blend of the old Roman pagan worship with lip service to the Messiah of Israel. To this day, they are obviously idol worshippers. The St. Peter statue that is found in the Vatican is historically an image of Jupiter, the deity to whom Romans sacrificed humans in their earlier years. This image is what the scriptures call the abomination of desolation that was set up in the temple by Antiochus Epiphanes. The Roman Catholic Church worships Miriam, who they call Mary or Maria, and they call her the Virgin, Mother of Deus, the Queen of Heaven, the co-savior of the world. In Latin, the word Elohim is replaced with the words Deus and Dios, which are the very name of Zeus in the Roman language. Zeus was called Eupater or Jupiter by the Greeks. Rhea is the name of the mother of Zeus. At times she was known as Maria. Catholics burn incense to her at their masses, but to the unlearned she is masked by the idea of Miriam, the mother of Yahushua, who was not a deity, nor was she an eternal virgin or the Queen of Heaven, but a simple and modest servant of the Most High Yahuwah. The Pope of Rome is referred to as Holy Father and worshipped by the world, while the Messiah of Israel states, "You shall call no man father." He is the little horn that Daniel the prophet spoke of, who changed times and seasons of the Most High Yahuwah. The crown he wears has been identified with the mitre of Dagon, the fish deity of the Philistines. This crown was worn by priests of Ishtar as they sacrificed babies and decorated eggs in their blood. The Catholic Church only uses crimson blood-colored eggs to this very day. The Catholic Church is responsible for the abomination known as Fat Tuesday, when their worshippers gorge themselves on the profane and parade like inhabitants of Sodom during what people call Mardi Gras. They are responsible for the abomination of fasting during Lent and celebrating Ishtar. They are responsible for the abomination of Sunday being a day of rest instead of the seventh day. Because of the Bishop of Rome, you have traded truth for deception. Now is the time to repent, to turn to Yahuwah, the Elohim of Yisrael, and to accept the Passover lamb, Yahushua. The Father, Yahuwah, has given all authority to his Son, Yahushua, so that in the day of judgment, all shall stand before Yahushua, the sovereign Messiah, whose eyes are like flames of fire, and whose voice is like the sound of a multitude. He will judge in righteousness and in right ruling. He has already told us that in that day, many shall stand before him saying, "Master, Master, we have done all types of works in your name." Yet Yahushua will respond to them, "Depart from me. You who work lawlessness, you who break the Torah, I never knew you. Yirmiyahu, who is called Jeremiah the prophet, told us in chapter 16 that the nations, the Gentiles, will turn to Yahuwah in the last days, and they will say to him, surely our fathers have inherited nothing but lies. And that is the case. Your fathers have inherited lies and vanity from the philosophies of the pagan religions. But now it is time to turn away from that your fathers have done and turn to the living Elohim, because we are at the end of the age and the time frame for repentance is closing. The book of Revelation discloses the final battle that will take place against good and evil. And we see what will take place is the rise of an entity known as the Whore of Babylon. This Whore of Babylon represents the mystery religion of mixture and confusion, because the term Babel means to mix and confuse. Therefore, the whore represents an apostate assembly that has engaged in pagan worship. Yahuwah Elohim will destroy the whore of Babylon by giving her a double cup of all of the blood that she has spilt on the earth. This time is coming, and it is prophetically hinted at in the book of Kings, when Eliyahu, the Tishbite, who has been called Elijah, threw down the challenge against the 400 prophets of Baal and the 450 prophets of Asherah or Ashtaroth, the consort of Baal. Eliyahu challenged the prophets that they would show up at Mount Carmel and that they would prepare a sacrifice without adding fire, and that the Elohim that answered by sending fire from the heavens would be the true Elohim. The prophets of Baal, they sacrificed their slaughtering and they brought it and laid it on the altar, and they wept and they wailed and they danced around and they worked themselves up into a frenzy all day long, praying for the Lord to hear them, because that is what Baal means. But Baal, the Lord, did not respond. Eliyahu laughed at them and mocked them and said, perhaps your mighty one is sleeping. Maybe he's meditating. You need to be louder and wake him up. Finally, it was Eliyahu's turn, and he repaired the altar of Yahuwah that had been torn down, and he saturated the sacrifice with water, and he saturated the sacrifice in so much that a moat that was around the altar even filled up. And then he called on the name of Yahuwah, because Eliyahu means my Elohim is Yahuwah. Eliyahu called on the name of Yahuwah, Elohim of Israel, and Yahuwah answered with fire, and he sent fire down that completely consumed the sacrifice in the eyes of all of Israel. And they turned back to Yahuwah Elohim, and they turned back from their sins. They tore their hearts before the true creator of heaven and earth. And then those false prophets of Baal and Ashtaroth were put to death by the edge of the sword. And so it shall be at the appearance of Yahushua in his day, when he comes in all the esteem with the messengers and the Kodashim, the set apart ones with him. He will annihilate those who worship other mighty ones and those who practice abominations. It shall come to pass. Now is the time to turn away. Turn away from Ishtar. Turn away from the worship of Tammuz, the pagan trinity. Get out of that Catholic religion. Come out of Babylon, my people. That is what Yahushua said in the book of Revelation. He said it because he knew that his people would still be in Babylon. Ultimately, this decision is up to you. But you are doing the rest of the world a great disservice, and know that you teachers and pastors who are teaching this lie, you will be judged on the day of the judgment. But the choice is yours. The rest of us who call upon the name of Yahuwah, we will endure unto the very end. We are those who have the testimony of Yahushua and keep his commandments. As the book of Revelation chapter 12 verse 17 says, we shall eat from the tree of life. But all of those who have worked falsehood and lies shall be burned in the great wrath of Yahuwah that is to come. Turn back from Ishtar and embrace the Passover lamb, Yahushua, the Anointed One.